What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the most controversial thing in bass fishing today, and that's a jig and a minnow. Because, love it or hate it, it is one of the biggest staples in tournament bass fishing today. If you really want to win consistently at a high level, you got to be a little bit good with a jig and a minnow. And so today what I want to break down is, where do you fish a jig and a minnow? Where do you start? Because it's not just go scope around until you find them and fish, because that could take days and days and days and days. So I'm going to show you how to break it down really fast. And then I'm going to talk about the baits that you throw on it, because it's not just put any bait on there and you'll catch them. There's a rhyme and a reason to the baits that you see and to the size of the baits that you see guys throwing today. And at the end, I'll touch on a little bit of gear. And then at the end, we'll break into a little bit of a Bible verse for those of you guys that want to stick around for that. So let's dive into, where do you fish a jig and a minnow? Because they could be literally anywhere. Ledges, docks, rocks, points, breaks, etc. They could be literally anywhere. Do you throw a jig and a minnow on all of those fish? No. What you're really targeting with this bait is suspended fish for the most part, or fish that are holding on particular pieces of cover. That's the key, right? So how do you find what we call floaters? Because that's the most common fish that gets targeted right now. The key is understanding your maps and understanding contours. So for those of you old school guys that are still watching it, all that bass fishing knowledge that you have in your head actually helps you be better with this bait, because you know where those fish are going to be moving. You know, all the young kids that come into the game want to just go throw a minnow everywhere, and they run into them. But if you understand the contours and understand what a good contour is, you'll be way better at it. And the thing that I want to talk about is tight contours, where those lines are really, really tight together. That's where you're really going to start seeing your fish, because those are those channel routes that those fish can move up and down. And the steeper the contour, the easier it is to see fish, because they chill off the bank a little bit. Those flatter areas, they play. But if you really want to get good at understanding where you can target those fish effectively with a jig and a minnow, it's understanding those tight contours are your highways. And that's where you're going to see your consistent groups of fish coming through. And that's where you're going to be really, really effective with it. Because like I said, they float off the bank, so they're easy to see, they're easy to target. And it doesn't have to be a tight contour out on the main lake. It can be, but can also be a tight contour back in a creek. You know, all of those same areas. So understanding the stage that those fish are in for that time of year. You know, right now we're closer to the spawn. So I want to get on tight contours that are back where those fish are going to want to be to spawn. Because then I'll be able to find those big females that are staging just off the bank, instead of catching just all those small bucks with a chatterbait or a jig or whatever up shallow. I can target the bigger than average fish with it. So when we're talking about tight contours, you can see I've been going back and forth right through here. So what I mean by tight contours is these fish are coming back into these basins, and right here you can see those super steep contours right along here. And that's what I was targeting, going back and forth, throwing that minnow, because there were suspended fish chilling just offshore right through there. And so I was able to just cast that minnow at them, target them effectively, and catch those fish. And you know, this one had a point off of an island. They were kind of stacked up on the outskirts of that point. They were super stacked off the bank right here, just because of the tight contours as we're getting back into these basins. Because you can see that's the last tight contour place back into here, and so that's why I was targeting that specific spot. Now for the baits that you're throwing on it, because if you look at a 4-inch bait, that is the majority of what people throw, that 3 to 5-inch bait, but the 4-inch bait is a staple. Why is that? There's two schools of thought when you're throwing a jig and a minnow. You're either trying to target the fish that are chasing bait, that are roaming chasing bait, the floaters, or you're trying to target fish that are on a specific piece of cover during the spawn. They're on a stump. Fish that are holding tight to something. Well, when you're fishing over suspended fish, 90% of the time they're chasing threadfin shad, which are relatively small, because threadfin are what you see those giant plumes of. That's the majority of what those fish are chasing, because those are the bait fish that like to sit high in the water column and are out there. That's what you see guys targeting. And so threadfin are pretty small. So that's why that 4-inch minnow plays tremendously. Now for the fish that are on specific pieces of cover, there you're trying to draw those fish off. And so if you're throwing a 4-inch minnow bait and it's not doing it, sometimes you have to upsize to get that reaction out of those fish. We see it with a big glide bait, we see it with a big swim bait. That bigger bait draws those fish up. We do the same thing with a jig and a minnow. That's why you see baits like that 5, 6, 7-inch Sakamata shads playing so good because it's such a big profile bait that it gets those fish's attention when they see a big gizzard shad coming over their head. So if you find an area and all of a sudden you're seeing big gizzard shad everywhere, bigger profile baits are going to be what you're going to want to use, because that's what those fish are targeting and that's what those fish are feeding on. And so it's really important to match the bait for the bait fish that those fish are feeding on, guys. It's super, super important because it'll change fish following it to fish committing on it, like that. Whoa, I got some serious sunglass tearing going on right there. Let's see if we can't get a couple of them on camera there. Readjusting my minnow. Just like that. It's a 3/16 ounce ball head. I tie a loop knot specifically to that just to make sure I give that bait the most wobble. And the key when I hit those fish is you'll see them, you'll throw to them. If you can lead them, lead them. And the one thing fish don't like, it's watching your minnow fall in front of their face. So if you can lead them, by all means, lead them puppies. So that way it kind of sneaks up on them. And then as they see it, you'll watch that mark go from half solid to solid. That's when I start burning it. Or like, not burning it, but playing cat and mouse. And you want to keep a distance, and all of a sudden they'll start to close it, and you just keep speeding it because you won't be able to pull it away from them. So the last thing that I kind of wanted to touch on is the gear that I throw it on, because one thing that I see a lot of controversy in is the leader that you actually throw to it. Do you throw a long leader? Do you throw a short leader? What's key for that? Well, it depends on how deep your fish are and the gear that you're using. I have started to use a short leader. This is literally a 3-foot leader because those fish don't see it. You know, when those fish are high in the water column and you're throwing over them and reeling it and shaking it as fast as you can, shorter leader, 12-pound line, I can horse them to the boat, get a really good hook set on them, no problem. If I'm fishing deep fish, then I tend to go to a longer leader because it allows my bait to fall faster straight down. Because braid doesn't sink as good as fluorocarbon does, and it has more resistance in the water. So it's going to put more of an arc in your line the shorter the leader that you have. The longer the leader that you have, the more straight to it it's going to be. So it all depends on how deep your fish are. Now, as far as the braid that I throw, I like 8-pound Cortland master braid, specifically because it's super thin diameter and I can bomb those baits when I see fish out there at 100, 110 feet, and then it allows my bait to sink really, really fast to get down to those fish. If you're fishing for suspended fish that are super, super high, I might go with 12, 15-pound braid because, again, it's going to keep that bait up and it's going to give it more of a pendulum. You know, if you're fishing for fish in shallow water on stumps, going with a heavier braid and a shorter leader is going to make it super pendulum, so that way you can hold it over one spot for a lot longer. And it's really, really helpful when you're fishing for those target-oriented fish, guys. As far as the rod and reel go, I love a softer combo. I love a really, really soft tip rod with a little bit of backbone. So this is actually an Arc Invoker Tour Walleye Series rod, because a lot of walleye fishermen like softer rods. They came out with a line of rods that are meant for walleye fishermen, and so I took advantage of that and I started using that to my advantage. So I'll have that link down below, as well as the baits that I like to throw on this. So real quick, guys, we are going to dive into that Bible verse right now. For those of you guys that want to check out the gear, I have that all linked down below. You guys can slide down and grab that, or check out this other fishing video I have linked here. But today we're going to talk about Psalm 23. And Psalm 23 says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He lead me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. For I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff comfort me." There's a lot to unpack there, right? That's a huge passage for such little lines. What I want to talk about is sheep, because we all take sheep, us being sheep and the Lord is our shepherd, as a compliment. Sheep are very dumb animals, guys. Like, he makes you lie down in green pastures because sheep don't know where to bed down, and they oftentimes will eat poisonous things, get into areas that they're not supposed to be. Like, sheep are the only animal that really need 24/7 supervision, and a shepherd was not like a high holy calling. It was like the lowest of the low. You had to literally watch animals that could continually almost kill themselves on a daily basis. Where it talks about he leads me to beside still waters, that's because sheep would often get caught in high current and get washed downstream because they are so dumb. They are dumb animals. And the Lord goes, I know some people like that. Those are my followers, right? That's what he compares us to. And so when you think about it like that, how he's taking a lowly position, right? Being called a shepherd and pulling us where we need to be man, I feel like that all the time, right? As sheep that wander away from, your master continually, I feel like that all the time, especially when we're talking about the Bible, right? And so he's not doing it out of spite. He's not pulling you away from certain things because he hates you and he doesn't want you to have that. If he's pulling you away from something, guys, it's because it's dangerous and it's not the path you're supposed to be on. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to read again, Psalm 23. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button to follow with the regular content. But God bless every single one of you guys, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next video.